Hey guys, reviewing while driving, and we're going to be talking this evening about the collaborative campaign building and specifically getting a setting together after you've done the collaborative work with your players and figured out what their characters are like and who they really want to play and what kind of game world those characters occupy. And so if you haven't seen it already, I would encourage you to look at part 2 of this series, because part 2 really gets into the those details about getting that information, because that really drives everything I'm going to be talking about right now. So one of the things you're going to want to know from the players is the game world in which the characters live, and there's a lot of different ways this can go. I intentionally asked questions about magic level, power level, climate, what sort of technology was involved, what genre generally are we talking about even, right? I mean, it could be, anything from, steampunk to, genre bending. It could be, swords and sorcery. It could be sandals and sorcery. It could be high fantasy, or any point in between. And so it was really important to me to sort of define the game worlds that their Uber character concept fit into. And unless you're dealing with a brand new group of players that have never played together, there's a pretty good chance that they all kind of have similar interests, right? Or else they wouldn't be in your group. I mean, they're playing together for a reason. They've probably played in other campaigns together, most of them. There might be a new player or two, but generally speaking, you're going to know, they're going to know each other, and they're going to have something in mind. I mean, there's going to be a range, right? It's unlikely you're going to get just a complete outlier. I mean, the guy who says, yes, my Uber character has to be in a Deadlands setting of, the Western fantasy, horror, Cthulhu genre, right? That's unlikely. And it's okay for you to say to your players at the outset, okay, this is a D&D game, so I'm asking you to make your ultimate D&D character, right? Not necessarily your ultimate character in any genre. So it's okay to have a, some kind of restrictor plate on the concept to say, okay, it's your ultimate fantasy role-playing character. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so you've got this this feedback then within those parameters, and so I encourage you to put that data into a spreadsheet or some similar data gathering system. You could use index cards to whatever, but the idea is that you have a way to view all of the responses collectively, including your own. Your response matters. As I've said before, you're a player too. The world you want to play in matters, because we want to make a game that, as a DM, that you would want to play in, and you'll get to play in it, right? I mean, so it's good for us as DMs too. So don't be too restrictive. I mean, as far as yourself, get you involved too. So once you view that, you're going to see trends and patterns, and I've talked a lot about the overlapping circles of interests, and you're going to have some consensus generally. Now, there are going to be differences too. There's going to be some players that they really would prefer to play in a low magic setting. They want something gritty and more realistic, perhaps more Game of Thrones-ish, right? Something that's fantasy, but not like where everybody's got a magic item and there's spells everywhere. And then there's other people that think Faerun is too low magic, right? I mean, they're gonna want to be in this uber high fantasy, almost high-tech fantasy world, something maybe like Eberron or some other type of super high fantasy concept game. And so this is one of the reasons why you need to come up with multiple proposals. Okay, it is unlikely that you're going to be able to come up with one proposal that aligns 100% with what everybody wants to do. That's extremely unlikely. What's going to happen instead is it's going to be shaded so that everybody's going to have at least one concept that they can fit into. So I want to talk to you then about how to come up with that. So, and I'm going to give you 2 concrete examples that I used in our collaborative campaign building. So overall, I would say the group was interested in episodic gaming as opposed to giant story arc gaming. They wanted something that we could rotate in and out of, where if we had missing players, it wasn't a big deal. We didn't have to explain all this game time explaining where the missing characters were. So they wanted episodic. Overall, the group wanted medium to high magic. I didn't, but they did. They wanted something, this part was interesting. There was a high common interest in a coastal, temperate, wet world. So sort of this, like Seattle, right? The Pacific Northwest, something, or of an oceanic climate, right? So you could go with the Pacific Northwest or Northern Europe. That was sort of the climate they wanted. And I thought that was interesting that a large number of them really zeroed in on this independently of each other, right? Because it was a blind questionnaire. So you've got, so I had these different ways to skin the cat. Now, I had 2 ideas in mind. One of them was a pre-existing homebrew campaign world that I'd been working on for years. It's called Dunlisle. I've been working on it in one form or fashion since really 2012, when I was really getting serious about it. And before then, I'd played around with it in different forms. But so this was this, I had story arcs already in mind. I had NPCs. I had a rough idea of a map and the kind of game I wanted to run. And so I thought, okay, well, part of this is I had made this setting. It was something I loved. And again, it was something that I wanted to play in. So I decided I would make that one of the proposals, but I tweaked it to fit what the players wanted to do. So in my original homebrew setting of Dunlisle, I had made it as a low magic place. It was chock full of story arcs as opposed to, more of an episodic style. And the players were relatively a moderate power level, of moderate importance. And whereas in the questionnaires, the players wanted to be, movers and shakers, at least, maybe not right away, but eventually. Also, this is interesting. I've always been a big fan of starting at level 1 and building up. And a majority of the players wanted to start at higher level. And I've really never played that way. And so it was a little weird to me. I kind of like the idea of, growing into your character, but the players didn't. And so I relented and I said, okay, well, everybody can start at 3rd level in this setting. So, and they wanted also, in terms of personal power level, to be pretty powerful characters. So also in the proposal, I put in there, instead of locking them into a point by character build, I allowed them to roll the 4d6 method and then letting them re-roll one of the dice one time for all of the stats. So that all of those things were concessions that I had made to make my pre-existing idea homebrew setting fit with what they wanted. Now the good part is a lot of it, what was a good fit from, without having to change anything, right? And that was cool for me. I thought, well, how great, the players want to play something that I've already, largely made, and that was really nice, because I was kind of thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to create something, completely from scratch. And the dirty little secret is I didn't. I had already made you know, a lot of it, and I had NPCs, and I mean, I've changed a lot of it as we've gone, but I had the more than a basic framework. I had a lot of meat on the bones already, even down to the, you know, the climate was the same. I mean, in Dunlisle was a sort of, you know, Scottish, Irish influenced cultural setting, set after this post-apocalyptic or this apocalyptic event, and so the whole world is coming out of this dark age, and I really got into this idea of the points of light. That was something that was a 4th edition concept, where, you know, the world is a dark and dangerous wilderness, and, you know, but there's these points of light out there that that are, you know, beacons of civilization. So I thought, okay, well, I like that for this, you know, coming out of a dark ages, and now here's this this area that has this sort of manifest destiny to sort of reclaim the land, and to see what effects this cataclysm had on the world, because, you know, the land was literally changed, and the peoples and the animals and everything else. So so that was my first proposal, was Dunlisle, and I thought, so, and by the way, I need to mention this, I made this open for all the players to pitch it, right? So they could pitch a proposal too, that, because I gave them the spreadsheet, okay? So when I say it's a collaborative campaign building, I really want to emphasize that. I gave them 95 or 98% of the spreadsheet information, everything but the little character secrets that some of the players, you know, hung on to. But everything else, I made it public. So everybody was free to come up with their own proposal. And had that occurred, and had the players voted for it, that player, or me, I guess, would have been running it. Now, as it turned out, that didn't happen. I mean, the players liked one of my proposals, which I'll get to, and that's what they ran with. But they were free to do so, okay? And so, and what's interesting about that is that some of them, instead of making a proposal, ended up using their own ideas and content to put it into the collaborative world that we did decide on, okay? So, in other words, even though they didn't make a proposal, they did have setting input as it went along. So it wasn't like I just completely took it over. I mean, their involvement was and is ongoing, okay? They're still giving me information even now, okay? So the second proposal that I came up with was very different. It was a high magic setting, which a good number of the players wanted, and it was a very episodic campaign, and so this one was sort of inspired by the Odyssey or Star Trek or any number of TV shows, where basically, instead of the player's home base being the city, the player's home base was a ship, and it would be this magical sailing ship, and I named it the HMS Corallus. And the Corallus, and it's also kind of influenced by, you know, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and you know, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's this magical sailing ship, and so the idea was that every session or episode or whatever, the players could go to another place, and so they were these world travelers, and they were essentially agents of the crown of this large, you know, empire, and so they were sort of these jet-setting superstar, almost like fantasy superheroes that were going around and having adventures and solving problems. And it was a high-powered, high-magic, episodic campaign. And so it's got an Eberron flavor. You know, the Star Trek piece was, you know, this idea where they would have, you know, a crew. And so instead of a city where there's NPCs and, oh, here's the bartender, and here's the smith, and, you know, here's the guy who runs the general store, right? it was more like Star Trek, where the secondary characters were already on the ship, right? So that would be a lot of their interaction during the game, and even between sessions, would be with the lesser crew members. And so that concept was a little more aggressive, and it was a little more out there, but it did match what the players, a lot of the players, wanted to do. And so I basically floated these two concepts out there, and they were very different, obviously, but they were both consistent with what the players wanted game world-wise and just game-wise, the kind of game they wanted to play. And it was also consistent with the kinds of characters that they wanted to play in their Uber game. So they loved both of them, by the way, but they chose collectively Dunlyle, the first one, and which was great for me. I mean, because I already had a lot of the content, but so that's what they picked. But they said, that other game, the ship one, the Corrales one, that was something that they would be interested in. And had there been other proposals, we would have entertained them, but there weren't any as far as a complete coherent campaign. And so instead what happened was the players chose to contribute that content, like I said earlier, to Dunlyle. So then it was a matter of merging their ideas and sort of solidifying the characters and fleshing out and building up the setting to really fit the characters. And so what happened then was, after we settled on the setting, we made a concentrated effort to go back to the characters and do like a full fleshing out and placing them in the setting. Okay, so we revisited the character piece again, and what that ended up doing was reinforcing the setting, because now we had a setting that was where there was more details that were developed because of the characters. So I'll give you an example. One of the characters I've talked about was a ranged fighter guy. Well, and after interviewing him and talking with him, he kind of wanted to come from this family of essentially gypsies, human, but from this wandering race of people. And okay, so and we decided that the best fit for him would be as a ranger and as a hunter, and I guess that's not really surprising, but we decided that's what he thought that was the best class fit. So then this was the cool part. He really got into the backstory part of it once we had kind of talked about it, and I was very surprised because I wasn't really expecting a lot from him in terms of content. But he came back with the name of this clan of people and where they came from and kind of how they thought and lived and where they what they believed in and how they dressed, and he had a lot of cultural details about this group. Well, I had not. This was totally new information for me, so we had to put that in the setting. Another player had built out his little family tree. One of the noble characters had done that, so we had to work that in. And so with every player then, their player content necessitated setting content. And so there was this feedback that was going back and forth between the characters and the setting. And so that ended up resulting in what I called the Campaign Gazetteer, which ended up being like a 20 or 25 or 30 page document. That was just the first version of it, right? That detailed the region and the social aspects, the technology, the administration, the military, the political part, the industrial part, the magical part, any external issues, the religious part, all of those different aspects of the city, because it was a city-based game, the city of Dunlisle. And then I used my own interest in mapping and maps. I drew out a regional map, and I also ended up doing a city map, which I'll talk about in another video. And then what became apparent was the stuff that I didn't know that I needed to know. And so instead of me beating my head against the wall trying to come up with more stuff, I put it out there to the players, and we had an online chat session about, and we gave assignments out for players to get stuff to me. Like, for instance, we had this cataclysmic event, and I posited that would have affected animals a certain way. So I said, okay, I need somebody to give me 5 interesting animals that were affected, and somebody else give me 5 interesting plants, and somebody else give me 5 noble houses, and somebody else give me 5 interesting places of business and locations within the city. And so I was able to populate the setting with contributions from the players, and for the most part they were all game, they were all in. And I'll get into later sort of the campaign launch piece. I think that'll probably be the best next video, was launching it. But I have to tell you that it was this process I'm speaking of right now, where we were going back and forth with refining the character, putting the character in the setting, and then fleshing out the setting with the player content. That was where the characters got bonded to the setting, or I should say the players. That's where the players got bonded to this whole process, and they were in. And it was, I didn't even really know it at the time. I at the time I felt like, oh my God, I'm just being this demanding jerk, where I'm asking them to give me all this homework, and I'm sure they were like, oh God, well, you know, when is he going to start the campaign already, and why can't he just be the DM, and I just want to be a player. I was really, I had pretty low expectations, but what I got back was this incredible feedback, you know. So I had to use it, right? And so I did, and you know, there's that pride of authorship. The players spent a lot of time on their characters and on this game world that their characters would adventure in. So yeah, I mean, if I thought about it, I should have realized, well, yeah, they're going to be into it, and yeah, they're going to want to do it because they helped build it. They're invested. They spent time in it, and it's something that they care about. And then something else happened that was very cool, which I wasn't expecting. I probably should have, but it was that the players then started interacting with each other outside of my presence about the setting. Okay, so they're working out how their noble house knows this other noble house, and who their relationships are with, and they sort of merge their backstories to fit each other's. And so they were working on the game completely outside of my presence, and then they would come back and say, oh yeah, Gene, by the way, we need to tell you blah 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 blah. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for telling me, you know. And so, but it was funny because I had this, you know, we've all kind of played, I think for the most part, in these kind of top-down games where the DM is this, you know, story master and in control of everything. And so, like I've talked about in previous videos, this is really more of the DM as editor and gatherer of information, as much as being this controlling, you know, mastermind of the whole campaign. I mean, I still do that, but it's not nearly as much. So the back channel conversations that were happening, again, were another empowering feature that really allowed the campaign to take off and give them ownership of it. And in fact, in certain sessions, I was able to turn to the players, you know, even for just a an interaction or a description of something and say, tell us what happens, right? So, and that's because they had developed that content. Let me give you an example, super quick. So, as I mentioned before, one of the players his character ended up getting married after a drunken drinking episode, you know, kind of a carousing thing, and he ended up getting married. And it totally, you know, took the campaign down a right-hand turn. And this is in the very first session of the game, okay? You know, talk about a twist. Well, our twist happened in the very first session. Well, okay, so his buddy, one of the other characters, planned out his bachelor party. Well, this bachelor party involved a hunt and a barroom brawl, and going to this sort of outdoor amphitheater, and another night of drunken debauchery and revelry, okay? The bachelor party took up 2 hours of one of our recent sessions. And it was an after-the-fact bachelor party because they kind of eloped the first time, and then they were going to have this formal wedding, and so the bachelor party was before the formal wedding. But you get the idea. So when it was time for the bachelor party to actually get played out, I turned to the player and I said, okay, well, tell us what we're doing now. And so, and I was able to surrender the DM seat a little bit and let him sort of describe what he wanted to do. And we were able to, with his input and my improvisation, play out this half of a scenario that was completely of the player's own volition and design, because it's what he wanted to do. So it had player agency and it had player created content, and they made it happen, and I just sort of provided the backdrop so that they could do what they wanted to do. Okay, and I think that is, if there's a lesson in all this, it's that. It is that once you go down this collaborative path, you can't just yank it away from them. You have to sort of give over to the fact that they're going to be wanting to continue on with the collaboration. It's not a one-time thing where they're sort of forever, you know, like they do this one collaboration and now you own the campaign from them. I mean, that's not how it works. It's an ongoing thing, and you need to go into that with your eyes open. Okay, so if you have to tell a certain story, or you have a certain end game in mind for the game, you know, the collaborative campaign style may not be for you, and I want to just caution you about that. So thanks for listening, and next time we'll get into the launching of the campaign. Take care.